Welcome to week 1 of the 2025 Ditch the Grocery Store Challenge. If you're new here, hi, I'm Stacy. I am a homesteader, a mom of 8 going on 9, a homeschool mom, and a blogger over at the FromScratchFarmhouse.com. I like to share my journey of ditching the grocery store, our current challenge of trying to stay out of the grocery store for a year on my blog and also on Instagram, as well as here on YouTube. Lately, when I've been sharing our journey, I have had a lot of people tell me that they're not quite ready to ditch the grocery store completely, but that they would really like to become less dependent on the store and learn to make things from scratch. So this is where the challenge comes in. Each week throughout this year, I'm going to share how to make one staple from scratch or how to switch out a disposable item for a reusable item so that you can, one thing at a time, reduce your dependence on the grocery store. The videos will include household staples like dish soap and things like ketchup and mayonnaise and bread and all the things that you probably are grabbing at the store on a regular basis but are very simple to make at home. Along with the tutorial video, there will be a printable recipe in the description as well as any resources to help you. I've also made a fun printable to help you keep track of everything you've ditched in 2025. The goal is 20 items. I've also created a Facebook community that I will link below if you want to connect with other people who are on this same journey. You can share tips and tricks and just encourage one another. Today we are kicking it off with sandwich bread. I think that making your bread at home instead of buying it from the store is one of the most impactful things you can do in your kitchen to both reduce your dependence on the grocery store, but also improve your family's health. It can also be a huge cost savings, especially if you have a big family like ours. Because I know that everyone is at a different place in their journey to making things from scratch or even just learning how to cook and bake, I'm going to have 2 different recipes in this video. The first one is a very simple sandwich bread recipe that uses all-purpose flour. My kids absolutely love this recipe and it's my go-to when I'm not feeling like grinding or I don't have the time to grind homemade flour. So it's simple, it's quick, it's very great for the person who maybe works outside of the home and they don't have a lot of time. You can make it in an evening very easily. So I'm going to start with this recipe. Then I'm going to share another recipe that I've been using more recently using home ground flour, and my family has been loving it. It's still soft and wonderful bread, but it is using whole grain flour, which there are a whole host of benefits to doing that. My hope is that with the combination of these recipes, you will be able to ditch store-bought bread in 2025. These are also family tested and kid-approved recipes, so you're not having to guess with random recipes off the internet. Next week, I'm going to be sharing with you how to ditch commercial yeast and work with sourdough. But I do think that before you ever attempt your first sourdough starter, you should learn how to make a really good loaf of homemade bread using commercial yeast. While I love working with sourdough, there are many times when I have to choose between store-bought yeast or store-bought bread, and obviously it's more important to get that homemade bread on the table. In fact, as I've been learning more over the last few weeks about home ground flour, I am convinced that freshly ground flour is even more important than using sourdough. So if you're on your bread making journey and you're looking for some more advanced skills, I would actually explore home ground flour and getting a grain mill before I would even dive into sourdough, but that's just a personal preference based on everything that I've learned. Okay, one of my goals with these videos is to keep them very simple. I just want it to be like you're in my kitchen with me, learning from me here. I think often we get bogged down by too much information. So I'm going to keep things simple, but I will provide additional resources if you'd like to dive into certain topics further. Okay, let's get started with my absolute favorite sandwich bread recipe that uses either all-purpose flour or you can use bread flour. I've been making this recipe for years and it's a great one to get started with if you're new to bread making, if your family is used to store-bought bread, or if you have limited time and resources. You know, you don't have the ability to go buy a grain mill right now, but you want to get started baking bread. This recipe can be made in an evening, so if you work outside home, it's great for that as well. I'm going to be using a stand mixer for these recipes, but if you don't have one, just add the ingredients in the same order to a large bowl and mix and knead by hand. To the mixer, add 1 1/3 cup warm water, 1/3 cup olive oil, 2 teaspoons salt, 4 cups of either all-purpose or bread flour, 2 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons of sugar, and 3 teaspoons of instant yeast. Admittedly, I use active dry yeast, and while I've never had an issue doing this, I do know that active dry yeast isn't supposed to just be added to a recipe like I do here, so if you only have active dry yeast on hand, use at your own risk, or simply whisk it into your wet ingredients in order to activate it first before adding your flour. No need to mix in between or add in any unnecessary steps. Just dump these in and continue on. This recipe is so easy. If you would prefer to use honey as your sweetener, you will just end up adding in a tad more flour as we knead it up to make up for that extra liquid. Now put the dough hook on your mixer and then turn it on to low and let it mix until well combined. You should notice at this point, as the dough mixes up, that it starts to form a ball and pulls away from the sides of the mixer. If this is not happening, you may need to add a little bit more flour. Just sprinkle in a little at a time until you see that dough ball forming and the sides of the bowl becoming clean. Then kick up the speed just a notch or two and let it knead for 5 minutes. If you're doing this without the mixer, blend it well with a wooden spoon, dump the dough onto a floured surface, and then knead by hand for 5 minutes. Next, form the dough into a ball and place it into a greased bowl. I usually just put a little avocado oil on the inside of my bowl and then set my dough ball inside of that. Sometimes I skip this step and it's fine. It will just stick a little bit more to the bowl on your next step. Cover the bowl with a light towel and put it in a warm place. If your house is cold, try putting it in your oven with the light on. Just don't forget it's in there. Let the dough rise until doubled. This took about an hour for me. After the dough has risen, punch it down and separate the dough into 2 well-greased loaf pans or in a large bread pan. Press it down flat into the shape of the pan. I used to just form a log with my hands and then shove it down into the pan, and now I push it out into a rectangle and kind of fold and roll it into a log and then pinch the seams. The point of showing you this isn't to overwhelm you with the specific techniques, but to point out that it really doesn't matter. Just make sure to push out any air holes and to make sure any seams are pressed together. It will turn out fine either way, and over time, you will figure out what works best for you. I am obsessed with my USA Pullman bread pan that I'm using here. A perk of this pan is that there's no need to grease it at all. I always get a lot of questions about it, so I will link it below. And then next, you're going to place your lightweight towel over the pan and let it sit until it's almost doubled in size again, which will vary depending on how warm your kitchen is, but mine took about 1 hour. When it looks like it's getting close, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and then bake your bread uncovered for about 30 to 35 minutes or until the internal temperature is 190 degrees and the top is golden brown. Remove the bread from the oven and immediately remove it from the pan to let it cool on a cooling rack. Then take a stick of butter and generously rub the top and sides of the loaf. I know you're going to want to dive right in, but letting it cool before cutting it open will result in the best texture. Trust me. My favorite way to cut bread is with an electric knife because it doesn't push down on the bread as it cuts. Now, enjoy. The next recipe I'm going to share with you is very similar, but it uses whole wheat flour. You can purchase whole wheat flour from the store, or you can purchase a grain mill and grind your own flour at home. I personally don't feel like there are a ton of health benefits to purchasing whole wheat flour from the store and then using it in your bread, because when the germ and the bran are intact, they have a lot of oils in them that can cause the flour to go rancid fairly quickly. And there's also a very quick breakdown of nutrients in that flour after it's milled. So my preference is to grind your flour at home, which is what our family's been trying to do more of lately. First of all, if you're in the market for a grain mill, I do want to point out that I do not recommend the grain mill that I'm using in this video, and actually the company Nutrimill doesn't even sell it anymore. It does grind a fine flour, but it's slow, finicky, heats up the flour, and makes a terrible mess. My dream is a Como mill, but I just can't afford to make the switch quite yet, so hopefully soon. Okay, so step 1 is to grind your grain. Using a mill like this one, you simply add the grain to the hopper, set how fine you want the flour, and out it comes. Mine is a little bit trickier because I have to monkey with it the whole time, but it still doesn't take very long to get enough flour for this recipe, which is about 4 cups. I always estimate a little on the high side and then just save the rest of the flour for next time in the freezer.
As far as what type of wheat berries to use, I would recommend either hard red, hard white, or Kamut. I'm going to be showing making bread with all hard white, but a lot of people enjoy a 50-50 combination of hard red and white. My favorite grain to work with is Kamut, and yes, you can make this exact recipe using Kamut flour as well. It will just have a slightly different texture. Here is a quick lesson on wheat. Hard is for recipes that call for yeast, like most breads and pizza dough. Hard red has a nuttier, richer flavor, while hard white is more mild. Soft wheat is for quick breads that don't call for yeast, pastries, and cookies. Kamut and einkorn are common grains that are often referred to as ancient grains. We love Kamut and often use this in place of hard red or white. And I should point out that Kamut is actually a brand name. I believe the actual grain is called Khorasan, but if you just look for Kamut or Khorasan online, you will find many different suppliers, including where we get it, which is Azure Standard, and I will link that below. Alright, that's all I'm going to say about grains and grinding flour, but if you want to dive into this more, two wonderful resources are Sue Becker's book, The Essential Home Ground Flour Book, and the digital resources and cookbook created by my friend Kristen Nobles at Generation Acres Farm. I recently bought her Fresh Breads digital bundle, which includes her entire cookbook, in addition to other helpful tutorials, and I can't wait to share it with you because she has so much knowledge and amazing recipes for those looking to make the switch to 100% whole wheat in all of your baking. Both of those resources will be linked below. Okay, let's make the dough for the whole grain bread using the flour that we just milled. First, I'm going to add 1 1/3 cup of warm water to my mixer bowl. And again, it should be very warm, but not so hot that you can't hold your fingers in it. Then I'm going to add in 1/3 cup of liquid honey, 1/3 cup of light tasting olive oil, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of lemon juice, and 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast or instant yeast. Either will work here, but active dry is usually what I have on hand. The lemon juice in this recipe is to help soften the bran in the wheat. Whisk those ingredients together well, and then let the mixture sit for about 4 minutes or until you start to see the yeast foaming at the top. Then add in 3 cups of your whole wheat flour, and then turn on your mixer until the flour is completely moistened and the mixture well combined. You might need to help it a little with a spatula, then let that mixture sit for about 5 minutes. Next, start adding a 1/2 cup of flour at a time while your mixer is going on a low speed until the dough pulls away from the sides of the bowl and starts to kind of move up the dough hook. Hopefully you can see this progression in the video here. When it gets to this point, you can push the dough down the dough hook and then place a towel over the dough and let it rest for 10 minutes. When that time is up, turn the mixer back on and continue to knead it until it passes the window pane test. This is a test to see if it's time to move on to the next step. You grab a little ball of dough and slowly stretch it apart. If you pull slowly and it breaks apart, it's not ready. Keep kneading. If it stretches to the point where you can see light pass through without it breaking, you can stop kneading. I don't know if you can see very well here in this video, but I was able to stretch it apart so that I can see light pass through. Next, grab the dough and form a ball with your hands. You're trying to create some surface tension as you're forming it into that ball. Then place the dough ball back into the bowl, and yes, you can grease it a little here first so it doesn't stick to the sides as it proofs, but I'm usually too lazy for that step, so do whatever works for you, and then cover it with a cloth. I then like to proof my bread in the oven with the light on to speed things up, but if your house runs on the warmer side, you might not need to do this. When your dough has doubled in size, it's time to do the next step. If you're baking in traditional bread loaf pans, you will want to grease your pans and split the dough ball into 2. I'm using a large Pullman pan here, which is why I am not doing this step. Take your dough and spread it into a rectangle slightly longer than your pan. Tuck in the edges and then roll it into a log. Then pinch the seams tightly closed. Place the log into the pan and gently press it down. If you're using loaf pans, repeat with your second ball of dough. Place the pans or pan back in your warm spot, covered in a towel or plastic wrap, and then when the dough has almost doubled in size, preheat your oven to 350. Bake the bread uncovered for about 30 minutes or until the top has nicely browned and the internal temperature is 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Remove the bread from the oven and immediately remove it from the pan to let it cool on a cooling rack. Then take a stick of butter and generously rub the top and sides of the loaf. I know you're going to want to dive right in, but letting it cool before cutting it open will result in the best texture.
No matter which of these recipes you choose, you're going to end up with a beautiful loaf of homemade bread that is both more nutritious and more affordable for your family. The best part though is the satisfaction from knowing that you are nourishing your family with something that you created. I hope that you will join me in the weeks to come in the 2025 Ditch the Grocery Store Challenge. Next week, we are diving into sourdough. I put out a video years ago, I believe, on how to make a sourdough starter and get started with sourdough, but I really feel like I have simplified and perfected the process, so I'm excited to share that with you. If you have struggled with sourdough in the past, maybe you tried to make a starter and it never bubbled or had issues getting really good bread, I want you to come join me for this because I feel like if you give it another chance, you're really going to find success with these methods. Even if sourdough isn't your thing, don't worry, there are many weeks ahead and many different topics and things that we're going to cover. So you only need to complete 20 in order to complete the 2025 challenge. Also, in addition to these challenge videos, I'm planning on continuing to put out my regular content on Fridays as I'm able, so make sure to join me there as well. And if you turn on your notification bell, you'll get notified whenever I put out a new video. All right, friends, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you here for the next video.